All right, so hello, my name is Heidy Canales, and I'm interviewing
Nicole Andrade.
for the Latinx Oral History Archive on January 12th, 2022. So thank you for taking the time to interview with me today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course.
All right, so we're just gonna jump right into the interview. So Nicole, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? So what can you tell me like where and when you were born? Tell me about like where you grew up. Did you move around when you were a child? What was your family structure like? Was it big? Was it small? Your neighborhood? Just kind of give me a brief overview about you and how you kind of grew up.
Sure. So I was born 1999 in Queens, New York, specifically like Jamaica area. And I was there for like, I would say almost like near the end of elementary school, was up until when I moved from Queens to Long Island, because at that time, academically was when we had to start looking into what other schools we'd be going into. I started at a Catholic school, very heavily like um, Latinx people, Black people. Like it was a whole school of like minoritized people, and it was like really great because like I was able to have friends who like had the same culture as me, same everything like that, or at least very similar experiences. So it was like a very like easygoing classroom area. But considering the area that I lived in, because I was in Catholic school, it was a private school, but I did need to have to start taking testing to go into like see what public school I would go into for middle school and high school. And the options in my area, like in my neighborhood at the time, were really not good, like very underfunded, very all like all the bad stuff that unfortunately a lot of city schools go through just because of where they are, like geographically, which sucks. And because of that, like my parents got really concerned about like how I'd grow up and like what would I really take from school. So they really wanted me and my younger sister to be able to get the most we could out of like our education. And that's when we moved, kind of like right at the border of Queens and Long Island. So like still not too far from where we grew up. But it was like a definitely a much more like it got a lot more attention from like local government, a lot more funding and stuff like that. So it ended up being great for me educationally. Um, the biggest downside that I always like noted about it was that the demographic at the school, while it wasn't like a predominantly white school, it actually didn't have that many white kids there, but it still was like I think I was like one of three Hispanic students in my graduating class of like 300. And then in like the school itself, I was like one of like five Hispanic students, like in general. Um, so it was like weird because it was like being a minority in the minority. So it was an interesting experience because I'm glad that like it did help me like get to know other cultures and stuff. And really, what's it called? Like really appreciate it, especially because I think it's attributed a lot to how I've become like growing up. But because of that, I still did miss being around a lot of Latinx people, like I did in my younger years. And I definitely noticed that with how disconnected I was becoming with my culture. And not that that really played a part in where I was trying to go to college, but it definitely was something like I still need to get out of my bubble because this place clearly was keeping me like stuck. It was keeping me question my identity, the usual identity crisis thing that we all go through. That was definitely like when it was just starting, or at least in the middle of it, somewhere like that. So yeah, but luckily, my family were still very supportive of everything I was doing. And they definitely realized that there was a huge change because my mom can even remember like from the moment I started in the new school to the moment I graduated, how like I would always say, I want to go back to Queens. I want to go back to my family, like there and my friends there. So it was a noticeable like change, not just for me, but also like the people who were around me a lot. So
And then kind of tell me about your family. So, was it big? Is it big? Is it small? Like, does your extended family play a role in your life? Kind of tell me a little bit about that.
So my immediate family is my mom, my dad, and my younger sister. She's only like younger than me by like 3 years. So we were able to be that like close relationship with each other, like that support system, but also her still having her like own experiences as like borderline a different generation than me. Um, so yeah, and my parents were the first ones from their family in Ecuador on both sides to come to the United States. So at first, like especially in our younger years, it was a lot of like family trying to visit every once in a while, but it definitely was like a lot for my parents to have to be like, we're settling in here, not just by ourselves, but with two kids and like making sure that we can support them however. And like it got really busy job wise for them, especially, but luckily, after a while, like I think for middle school or early high school for me was when a lot more family members were able to join us in the US, especially in Queens area. So um, all the family that is here from my mom's side is in Queens. And luckily she's very close to them. So we've always been able to go back and forth, them visiting us, we visit them, and kind of still connecting me back to like my roots in Queens. So it was like a win-win for everyone. And the same thing for my dad's families. People were able to start then coming to the US. Not exactly in New York, a little more spread out among different states, but still was the same thing that we were able to keep close, and especially with how my parents were able to play a part in helping all those family members be able to, get settled here too.
And then, what did your parents do for a living throughout the time? I guess.
Yeah. So my dad had like multiple jobs. He doesn't go too in detail with that because he later, not too later on, like started his own small business. But my mom at the beginning was like the main like breadwinner of the family. She worked at like multiple hotels in the city as a house cleaner, or not a house cleaner, housekeeping in different like big name hotels. So that's what she would do a lot of the time. And then from that, my dad would kind of be like a stay-at-home dad sometimes, just to take care of my sister and I, because at the time we were very young. Um, and then roles switched up once my dad realized he really wanted to start a small business in like related to finance and banking. So that's what he started getting into. And he was able to get the help of his last job before starting his business, to help establish like an office and everything like that. And from then on out, like it kind of just stuck with um, his banking business, and my mom was able to help take care of us more, and also help with the business like on the side too. So it's kind of like that.
So tell me a little bit about kind of growing up, in New York. So I'm sure that there are a lot of like holidays and celebrations that are kind of unique to just even New York itself. So do you have any off the top of your head that you can think of that stick out to you and you remember either from your childhood or even your adolescence or even now?
So I feel like I'm trying to think. There was definitely like a Ecuadorian like heritage day, like the Puerto Rican day parade is huge. I never went to it, but I'm sure that like an Ecuadorian one was also happening. I think my parents tried bringing it us when we were younger, and it just kind of never picked up. But if anything, it got interesting because once we moved to our new neighborhood, the biggest demographic in my middle school and high school were like Middle Eastern students, Indian students, like Southeast Asian students. And so because of that, I got really immersed in like their cultures, and like my some of my friends are very religious. Um and so they would have huge, like, because that whole neighborhood was basically like those cultures, they would have huge like festivals and things like that. And I myself I'm not part of those cultures, nor am I part of those religions, But even for me, it was like, oh my God, this festival is coming up. What are we doing, guys? Like, it like somehow even got ingrained into me. And that was really cool because it's like, even my teachers would always remind us like the neighborhood and the like community that we had, you really couldn't find anywhere else because of how like diverse it was. So that was a really cool part. It might have not been like specifically like in the city or in like Queens even. It was more on Long Island, but it was still really cool because from there I was able to connect with like whatever roots that they had in Queens because it seemed like that was the case for a lot of families moved to that neighborhood was they started out in Queens and then moved out to Long Island. So yeah. And then Macy's Day Parade, like was one of the holidays, festival thingies that my parents would drag us out to. We always ended up sleeping like in a stroller or something, but it's funny pictures to look back on. So
What about like food growing up? Like since you were kind of immersed in, you started in Queens and then you went into like, a different culture, you were surrounded by a different culture. Like what were kind of like some of the staple foods for you growing up?
I definitely became a food critic because I was like, especially like going to like, for example, like Penn State, but that's a later thing, but like having like that standard of food because it's like not only was I surrounded by amazing restaurants, but also like people's moms would be like, here, try this. And I'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Um, Staple foods, I guess the biggest one would be ceviche, which is an Ecuadorian dish, and it's like the most staple. Not just because it's my favorite, but also because we would always make like a huge bowl of it for every single holiday. If it was like Christmas, New Year's, or like I don't know, we just came together for some reason. We would just bring out the big bowl, and it's like, okay, everyone to their stations. We're making ceviche. So I really love that food because it like wasn't just the food itself, but it was also the memory that was always attached to it. Like, oh, everyone's here, the big bowl's coming out, like we're all gonna do our part and then like have fun, like still like talking and eating and all that stuff. So I definitely say that. And then I guess I love Indian food, like, and that like of course helped because of like all my friends who are Indian and even like Middle Eastern friends who shared their own foods too. Like that part of the world, I love their foods. And so that was like a huge thing of like my friends always getting me invested, making me like the honorary family member at dinner, having their parents even being like, "Oh my God, you never tried this? That's crazy. I'm gonna make it for you right now." So those there's not like a particular food because there is so much that they made me try, but it was still really nice because it made me so much more open-minded too, like food wise, because I was a little picky eater when I was younger, but also like culturally, I think is what really helped open my mind to a lot of things.
And then kind of thinking back to like when you were growing up, do you kind of remember like what you wanted to be when you grew up? Like, every child always it's like, oh, I want to be this when I grow up. Do you kind of remember at the different stages of your life, like what did you want to be?
For me, it I feel like it changed every month for me. I just had such a creative mind. Like I think one year I wanted to be an actress and then another year I wanted to be a writer. Um but the I think the three biggest things was a marine biologist because I love the ocean and all that stuff. An astronaut because the great unknown of space, even though science is my worst subject. And then the third one, which is what I followed for my degree, was a politician or just like anything with political science, just to be elected official, helping people and all those good things.
And then kind of thinking broadly on that, like did anyone in your family study or attend university or vocational school? And then did they share anything about their experiences, like, leading up to you going to college?
So both my parents only finished at high school. My dad did try when my sister and I were very young and my mom was kind of really busy with her jobs. He tried his best to kind of get into college here, but it didn't really work out because I guess he got really busy having to be the one to take care of us. So he never was able to pull through with it, but he did try going to a couple of college classes. But besides that, I'm 100% the first one who went to a 4-year program. So my parents like my dad was able to give the most advice he could like based on those like few classes he took. And then my mom uh never went to college. So but that didn't stop them from still being like, oh, you could do anything. Like if anything that helped them like to really be open-minded about what I wanted to do. So they were very supportive of like if I wanted to be the randomest job that there is, they'd be like, yeah, do it. Even though like, was it realistic? No, but they were still like, if that's what you want to do, then like we'll help you out with it.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. They were just supportive in every way that they could be.
Yeah, exactly.
And then so in the end though, like why did you end up considering college in the first place? Like I mean, your parents didn't go to college, so I mean it could have easily been okay, like after I graduate high school, like I'm going straight into the workforce. So what kind of clicked in your brain?
So it was in large part, like a lot of it was my parents' own desire to go to college. Like even my mom to this day, she still will tell me like, oh, I wish I went to college and all that stuff. And like the regret of not furthering her education and hearing her reasons of like, well, you could do so much with a degree. It opens so many more doors than like what you would have without one. Um, just them especially really pushing it onto me like it doesn't like it's all right that we didn't have our chance, but if anything, like we want you to take full advantage since especially I was at like such a great school that had a lot of resources to help us with college applications or like just getting familiar with colleges in general, like as a concept. Um, so it was a lot of just like seeing what my parents weren't able to have for themselves, and my parents acknowledging that too, that they weren't able to get that further education, and just really thinking like, I don't want like for them, like I don't want my daughter to have the same regrets as we do. So we're gonna keep like pushing her to really do this and like it definitely 100% instilled in me like there was no second thought in my head that like I wouldn't be going to college, and if anything like I was going like above and beyond with my aspirations of college, thinking like I'm gonna go to an Ivy League and I'm gonna do all this and that. Did I have grades for Ivy League? No. But my parents were telling me like you could do anything, and I'm like, all right, Harvard. So yeah. And it was especially good that they were very supportive of it because um what's it called, counselors in my high school weren't too supportive. I feel like it's like the usual thing we hear from like every other person. Like they'll be like, oh, you're setting your standards a little too high, how about we go down a notch? And like because they would ask us to bring a list of all the colleges we want to apply to, and I had like 5, and she was like, 4 of these we should rethink. And I'm like, why? Like I think I have a shot, like, and it's worth trying. And she would keep bringing me down and being like, no, we should be a little more realistic and all those things. And I would tell my parents and be like, well, she said this isn't realistic. And they're like, that doesn't matter. Go for it. Like, worst you get is a no. So at least you try it. So, yeah.
And then what about like the people around you that you went to school with? Like, did they always consider college around you? What were they doing to prepare for college, or what different paths did people take kind of after graduation?
So for the people around me, it was actually a huge contrast to what my parents' background educationally was. Because while my parents didn't go to college slash never finished college, their parents were like doctors, lawyers, surgeons, like these really big, like very nice jobs. And it was like I guess for them it was always a thing, not just because of like for what I had, where it was like, we didn't get the opportunity for it, so we want you to have it. It was more of just like, well, it's what my parents did, so I'm just gonna do it too, kind of thing. That was definitely the sentiment like I saw, and I'm happy for them because like obviously everyone deserves a chance to go to college. But it definitely set some like different standards for me and for them, especially how I was treated by like administrators or like counselors in my school, where like I guess the usual background that they usually have for their students was like people who already knew their stuff, like knew what college application processes, knew how to file the FAFSA, or knew how to do this and that and that. Like you didn't need to know the basics. And then my friends did know the basics because of their parents, because of their older siblings and all that stuff. But for me, it was like the eldest daughter, well, the eldest kid in general. So it's like I didn't have an older sibling. Um, and even on both my parents' side, uh, in terms of cousins, they all went to college in like Ecuador, if they did go to college. So it wasn't that big of a help for like the connections, even just family wise that I had. Um, so there was that big jump, but I guess it didn't discourage me. If anything, it showed me like, you know what, I don't want to feel left out in this space of like people who college was always a thing in their path, like, and it's like a guarantee. So I want to like make sure that like they don't see me differently, and that they don't think like, oh well, she's gonna stay behind, do whatever. That I like set the standard, like, no, I don't know where you're going, but I'm gonna be going here too, or like, you know, keeping the same standard of what colleges they thought that I'd be going to with what I knew that I'd be going to, or to say, okay, like, you know,
That makes
having
sense.
helping to make sure like people weren't doubting me um just because of my background.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end, like, how did you even come to find out about Penn State? Like, what schools did you end up applying to? I mean, you said, Ivy League, even if you didn't have the grades, like, did you still apply to them? And then what ultimately made you decide to come to Penn State?
So NYU was actually like my dream school. And I guess it was because like first of all, like ever since like I was much younger, I really wanted to go back to Queens. And especially like with my mom who had like multiple jobs in the city, sometimes I'd be able to visit with her or like just spend some time in the city with her. So especially Manhattan was like always like kind of like a second home because of the memories I made. So it was like, I want to stay in that environment where I feel like that's where home is. And that's like, I guess why I chose like NYU, like that one's going to be my dream school. So for Penn State though, like I actually didn't know Penn State existed until I had one classmate who was like obsessed with attending Penn State. And that was all she talked about was like, oh, I just submitted my application for Penn State. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but good job. Like so and like I kind of just set that on the back burner, like, okay, well now I know that there's a Penn State University. Cool. But I really set my sights like solely to NYU. I did a couple of like more local colleges, but NYU was my really like big one. Unfortunately, as we know, it did not happen because I attended Penn State. But I guess it was good because while I was thinking in college, like I want a new environment, I want to be somewhere where I can like kind of start over again, but like I want it to be like 20 minutes from home. So the push to be like, well, you can't go to your dream school, so where are you gonna go? And then that being like, well, I heard this girl say she applied to Penn State, so let me do it. Like, just to have like some backups if I need it. And then I got in and I was like, well, you know, I've never been to Pennsylvania. I've never been to like, let alone like the farm areas of Pennsylvania. And that's what it seemed like it was in. So like, I want a change of scenery. So I guess that's my change of scenery, basically.
That was a very drastic change of scenery for
Yeah.
someone. Like, that's crazy. And then like, okay, so you ended up getting in, you got into Penn State. You obviously decided to come to Penn State. What factors, I guess I would say, kind of contributed you to making that ultimate decision? And then what did it feel like to finally pack up and come to middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania?
So for that decision, like in terms of my family, they were always like pretty open to hearing like why I was applying somewhere and then why it was like it was attracted to me. Um so it was very interesting to talk to my parents about Penn State because they also did not know it existed. Like in general, all the colleges that I applied to, besides give or take a few, they'd never heard of. Meanwhile, I was hearing it based off of what my friends were saying. So for Penn State, I never heard of it, let alone my parents never heard of it. So I was like, I'll look it up. I'll Google it because I didn't visit Penn State until after I accepted my admission. So I was just, constant days sitting at the computer showing my parents like YouTube videos of students at Penn State being like, that's what it looks like. It looks fun, all that stuff. Um, but in terms of like making that final decision, it was pretty difficult because like as much as I wanted to be in a very new environment, I still wanted to like stay close to home, stay close to what I was familiar with. But it was like, I've done that for my whole life. So like if I have the chance and my parents have the financial means and like, we just as a family have the ability to send me to Penn State, like, why not? Like what other opportunity will I have that is like so accessible to me than like what I had in front of me? So while my mom wasn't too happy about it at first, my dad was just like, we'll just figure it out as it happens. Like we'll learn about it. We'll learn whatever Penn State stuff there is to learn. So um yeah, I kind of
Optimism,
just
yeah.
went with it.
So what about impressions? So since you didn't get to Penn State until after, so I'm assuming orientation.
Mhm.
Um, what was the impression that orientation left on you? And then how do you think that that impression lived up to the rest of your Penn State experience? Did it match up? Did it not match up? Like what was kind of the vibe?
So it was, the big glowing lights word of culture shock. 100%, because like I said, even like in my school in Queens, like I think there was like 3 white kids in my like entire school or something like that. And then in my middle school and my high school, there was a few, but not enough to be like a predominantly white environment. So I was always surrounded by a very diverse environment, and especially like everyone, well, most people being very open-minded to everyone in that environment just because of like the people who were always around us growing up. And then I don't know what I was expecting, but I just didn't expect like I just felt so out of place like immediately in orientation. I remember that because, excuse me, yeah, they like group us up together, and then parents will like do their own thing. I don't know what they had scheduled for the parents, but then like students, we would stick together, and I was like constantly just looking like, is there anyone that's not white around me or something like that? Like I want to see a familiar face, like, because also like there was only like 3 other students from my graduating class who went to Penn State. um so I was like, I really don't know anyone here. And it was just wild to me because I initially I was trying to keep so positive, like in my mindset, thinking like, well, you know what, maybe it won't be that bad, maybe like, it'll be kind of similar to what I'm used to back home, just different faces, and like that's it. Um, and I always try to be very positive, and that's what I tried doing, but it I just couldn't like back away from the culture shock of it all, being like is is this where I'm like supposed to be? Is it like am I in the right place? Not like even just like the right college, but it's like, am I supposed to be here? Like kind of like imposter syndrome like type of thing. Like, is this for me if these are the people that are like clearly meant to be here type of way? So yeah.
No, that definitely makes sense. And then what about like leaving your hometown and like once you actually moved in. So now this time, like it's not just orientation. Like now you're coming in, you're moving into a dorm, like you're gonna stay here. Like this time you're not going back home, at least not right now. How did that feel? Do you remember those feelings or like that memory? Like, do you remember it? And can you kind of walk me through that?
Yeah. So I had gotten a double in East in one of the East buildings. And it was, well, East Halls is very much known for being very white. So that was something I especially noticed immediately at first, was like looking for some sort of familiar face that like because of how like different everyone was back home, and like being so used to that differentness, but not in a bad way, but in a way that's like because we were all different, we were all very open to understanding each other. And it was kind of like I felt like one of those visuals of like one small fish in a big ocean type of thing once I got there. And I did try keeping a strong face for my parents because I know like that was like their dream day, like moving me into a dorm and taking pictures at the lion shrine and different things like that. Like it was like the dream experience for them that they didn't get to have. So I was like, I'm gonna keep it together for them, gonna have fun, because also my sister was there helping me move in, and it was like I want to make sure she gets a good impression too of college since I'm the example for her. But once they left, like, oh, it was so hard making friends. Like it was very, very hard. And like it really tripped me out a little bit because I was like, I'm trying to be open-minded, be positive, but it was just something so different. Like I was not expecting that big of a switch up from the environment. Um, so it was very overwhelming, very, very overwhelming. And by that time, I kind of became friends with people over like the Facebook groups and stuff like that. So I was trying to hang out with people. I did make a good, like, kind of solid friend group of people. And it was going all right, but it just felt like there was this huge disconnect. Not that it was like I wasn't giving enough into the friendship or they weren't giving enough into the friendship. They were amazing people, but it was just like a friend group full of legacy children of like their grandparents or their siblings or their uncles and aunts, and everything's Penn State. And I'm like, I'm the first one in my family going to college. Like I have nothing in common with you. Um and it was just such a like a longing for like finding people who like could feel that same experience that I was, but without needing to explain myself, because I didn't even know how to explain myself like in the moment. Because I did try with my friends at that time. I tried to explain to them like, yeah, well, I haven't been feeling too comfortable in this environment yet, and like they kind of wouldn't understand it too well. But I don't blame them because I'm sure they had a different type of hype around Penn State like growing up, and then I was just like, I'm really alone. Like this is crazy.
No, I can only imagine honestly. Because I feel like when you have all those people kind of always like talking in your ear, like, oh, Penn State is so great, Penn State is so great, but then you don't see the greatness in it. It's just like, what am I missing, you know?
Yeah.
And then kind of thinking about like, the people that you met while you were here, do you think that they had or have or had a good understanding of your culture? So you could talk about either the beginning of your time at Penn State, afterwards, like, just kind of overall, do you think that people had a good understanding of your culture?
So definitely these first friends, they didn't really very much at all have a good understanding. And I think because of that though, I kind of tried like removing the like Latina-ness of me because I thought I was like, well, I'm probably overwhelming them, like thinking like, oh, what's so different about her? Like, and because like my family was always so like once I got home it was like Spanish and everything like that. And then here it was like there's no environment for me to be like that. So um I did find myself being like, Latina? Who's Latina? That's not me. Like, I don't know who you're talking about. Um, but it really didn't help, even though that they were, I'm so lucky that they were still such open-minded people because they did make the effort to try to like understand me. But it just wasn't what I needed. And like it ended in good terms because they did understand like I was looking for people who I could connect with. And luckily, like eventually I did find that. I did find like the underground community of like the face value like community that Penn State has of like literally students of color were just like you needed to like know someone to like get the in on the community
That's
like
exactly how it is.
and like it took me almost transferring like I was ready to be like how do I transfer to NYU like literally like over winter break I was about to like give in an application and my parents were like give it one more try, just really try it. And luckily that ended up being the semester that I did find like a bunch of Latinas on campus and I was like where have you guys been like for the last 4 months basically. And luckily those are people who like I was able to stick with. And then once they graduated by that time like I had already been able to connect with other students who had very similar experiences as me, and if not the exact same experiences that at least could like you can relate on each other with. So from then on out it was definitely a lot better, because I made sure like I found the space, a community that I felt very comfortable with. I don't want to lose that, so I'm just going to stay here and enjoy it. So by like the by the second semester of my time at Penn State, it went a lot better. Like with finding people who would understand me, understand my experiences, and just even my culture, which was like the biggest thing for me because that was what I was looking for. Even while I was in high school, like I want my culture. That's not what I went to Penn State for, but eventually it was something that I found, and it's like I didn't know I had to travel 5 hours to find it, but if that's what it takes, I'm really happy with what I got. So
And would you say that you felt supported during that time? Like, I guess maybe not in the first 4 months, but maybe afterwards.
yeah, 100%. Because it's like it just became so much more easier to make friends to form those support systems. Because I'm a very shy person. Like if I'm meeting you for the first time, I'll be super quiet, if not just like not talking at all. And it's like just for me to be like that with anyone, plus you may not be like so understanding of my culture too, and like I can't make that connection with you, it just makes it so much worse. So at least once I was able to find people who understood my culture or shared the same culture, it was like, all right, that barrier is away. Now I could just be my awkward, shy self and just, you know, grow out of that bubble with them and making those friendships. So it
And
definitely got a lot
then
better.
and then what about State College? So not Penn State, the campus and the students, but the greater State College community. Like, how would you describe your experience living in State College? What were some of the big differences that, between New York? Well, obviously, there's a lot of differences between New York and State College, but like, what were some of the things that you just couldn't shake, if that makes sense? Like, what were some of the things that just like, State College? And then also, like, what are some things that you would say, like, that kept you grounded to your roots, even though you were living in State College?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, like you said, there is like very noticeable differences between New York and State College. And like it definitely tripped me up a lot of times, being like, if I wanted to just be to myself, but maybe not in my dorm room, and just like kind of like, walk around, maybe just taking air. And it was like, oh, even my setting just makes me like feel so out of place. Because yeah, like we know there's not many like even just like Latinx establishments at State College. So it was very, and plus like the State College town itself also kind of largely exists because of Penn State. Like it was built around the university. So it's like even then the people who lived there are like, so Penn State, Penn State. And it's like I was still trying to grow into that like Penn State like mentality. So it was like that disconnect too of like I didn't know Penn State even existed like a few months ago, and now I'm here with people being like and I'm like no. So it was it was scary. It was definitely scary because I felt so out of place, like mentally and then location wise too. Um, but it is what I kind of signed up for. Like I knew that it was going to be different, and that's exactly what I wanted, was like to put myself in an environment that I wasn't used to and see myself kind of like being forced to have that growth. So it definitely was uncomfortable, but it that was still like what I was going for, because like I wanted to kind of push myself out of my comfort zone the way that State College like let me. And I mean, I had fun. I made the most out of it. Besides having to drive back and forth and seeing all the empty land, and it was like kind of creepy to me. Like it reminded me of horror movies. So I couldn't stop thinking about that. But yeah, it was it was all right. Definitely 100%, like if Penn State wasn't there and I was just there like in State College, I wouldn't have been staying for too long, because it's just like it's not my town type of thing. But they're cute. They're cute.
That makes sense for sure. I feel the same way. So now kind of jumping into like you at Penn State, you being Nicole Jara Andrade at Penn State, what were some of the things that you were involved in? So extracurricular activities, clubs, groups that you were in. Did you have a job? What did you do for, like if you did have a job? Kind of walk me through that.
So I first got involved in like a couple of things, because I was there for a political science degree. That was like my initial thoughts, like let me find some sort of political club that I can join so it could be both finding friends and also helping me with my academics. So I joined College Democrats first, and it was like a pretty brief time with them, because it was kind of the same thing where it was what I wanted to go for, but the people there like I felt like I couldn't really connect with. So I kept trying to find different clubs. I found the Eco Rep Sustainability Program, which is these kind of like ambassadors for the university to help make sure that like sustainability is like kept up by students with like recycling properly, and different types of like programs they would hold. But it was kind of the same thing again, kind of like I liked the program, I liked the club, but I couldn't really connect with the people there. Um, and then from those two, not really disappointments, but like, the disappointment from not feeling that connection with the people is where I was able to find Latino Caucus, because a friend of mine that I had met during the time where I finally found friends who like understood me culturally. She was able to connect me with Latino Caucus, because her name is Yesenia, and she was kind of previously involved with Latino Caucus at the time and told me like, "Hey, they're doing executive board applications. Like, would you want to do it with me? Like, I'll do it if you do it." Meanwhile, I think I only went to like one Latino Caucus event at that point, and I was like, "Would they even let me? Like, is that allowed?" She said, "Yeah," and then I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm applying." And then I applied, and it's like everything just kind of came together with Latino Caucus after that. Like I got super involved. It was like my biggest involvement on campus. And luckily from there it opened many other doors for me. Like Latino Caucus helps with like an admissions event that helps with multicultural outreach, which immediately connected me to my internship in that very office because of my work through LC for that event. The assistant director of that office like offered me a paid internship, and then from there like I just started doing kind of like joint things with both things. There were a lot of little things here and there across the multicultural community too that I did, like wherever I saw I could help out um different Latinx organizations, I stepped up however I could. um yeah, and then after a while I realized that my voice might be needed in the student government um, for issues going on with representation for multicultural students in the student government. And that's when I inserted myself into that area very briefly, but um, at a really crucial time. I think like the best time I could have gotten involved in that. Even though it was brief, I did what I needed to, and I came out happy with it, although it was brief. And then a last involvement that was really major for me was joining my current sorority, which is Lambda Theta Alpha Latin Sorority Incorporated, which was really like the cherry on top to my college experience of just like really figuring out like, well, this has been an amazing college experience being around people who knew me so culturally and all that stuff. Like I didn't want to let go of that. At that point I was like, should I try going to grad school here? Like I just didn't want to let go of that community. Like I was like even just kind of scared being like, I I came here like so scared of Penn State. I'm leaving here like so happy with all the like basically like the family I created at Penn State, and like I didn't want to lose that and like go back home to where like I could not have that. So luckily LTA was able to give that to me. It's like a much more long-term lifetime thing. But yeah, those, if I'm not missing any, I'm pretty sure those are like my most main involvements.
And then what sorry, my vision. But what were kind of some of your favorite places on campus? Like whether to go study or to just go sit, like what made Penn State feel, I guess, homey towards the end of your college career?
So favorite places. I feel like in the end, like even though I was like super involved in all that stuff, I still felt like I still needed places where I was like not too surrounded by people and stuff like that. So like the LC office was like a really great place for me because like it was people coming in and out. It wasn't like too many people at a time, or anyone who came in, I most likely had some sort of relationship with them, so I could just be like, oh hey, how's your day, or anything like that. The PRCC was like a place that I did end up going to like near the end of my time, um, just for a couple of times. But then once I really got settled into my admissions internship, which has an office in the Shields building, which is across from the IM building, I really loved staying there just because they what they were doing to help high school students realize their potential with going to college and continuing their education. Like that was just an environment that I really wanted to keep myself in, because it really encouraged me even just for myself to remind me like what my mindset was when I originally came into Penn State and being like, look at these kids, like they're starting out just like me. Like I was once in their shoes, and here I am now doing so much more than I ever even like could have thought that I'd be doing in college. Um, but yeah, it was great, the like spaces that I was able to have. Um, but I do still wish that I was able to find more places to feel more comfortable, because while I did still have my places, like I know that Penn State is not a tiny campus. Like University Park is not tiny at all. My legs feeling so much pain going up Shortridge Road, like tell me otherwise. But yeah, I really wish that like there were a lot more spaces on campus where I was able to feel that kind of comfort, where I could feel like, oh hey, like it's me again, like what's going on, everyone? Um, just like faculty and staff wise, or even just knowing like the students that I would encounter in different spaces on campus would make me feel like I'm not just like a sore thumb and like just kind of out of place. But from the few I did have, like for me being such a shy person, like that was perfectly enough for me.
And then what did you do for fun in state college or fun or leisure? Like what kinds of things did you do to kind of release that energy of the school week?
Um, luckily, by like my, I think it was my last 2 years, I was able to bring my car up. Yeah, the last 2 years I was able to bring my car up, and it really helped because there was like a Hispanic restaurant not too far from campus, but still pretty far. But it was like one of those places where like I could go speak to someone who like reminds me of my mom, eat food that reminds me of my family's cooking. Um, so I would always visit like Lupitas with friends. Like I especially had one friend who like it would be like every other week we'd be like, so we're going to Lupitas? Okay, let's go. I'm meeting you here. Um, so that was one of the things, is like visiting the few places like in like the actual state college town that had people that I feel like I could connect with. Um, other than that, I don't know. It was a lot of just like hanging out with friends in their homes and stuff like that, just making that family feel with people. What else? I tried going sledding, but it didn't work out. So I'm very sad about that. But yeah, I feel like the home was like everywhere, like everything for me was like being in people's homes, feeling like, because our culture is so familial, and it's like having that group of people, and that especially like a physical space to feel like that's where we can like kind of repeat what we're all used to. That was my favorite. Like Copper Beach is like an apartment complex off campus that like I have like the most of those types of memories at. So like literally if I like hear or see Copper Beach, I'm like, oh, my second home besides my dorm. So I feel like those are the few types of things. It's not too many because state college is state college. There isn't really too much to do, but it's still fun.
What about memories? So obviously, I'm sure you have tons of memories being at Penn State, but what are one or some memories that stick out to you and that or that you hold dear and special from Penn State?
Um, from Penn State. Honestly, you wouldn't think meetings are fun, but I feel like I loved being at like LC meetings, especially. I don't know. I was just a nerd. Like when I had found an interest in something, like I really loved it wholeheartedly. So I loved being like in like just everyday meetings with people talking about like what we could do next for the community, because it just like it like fired me back up to be like, for the days where I'm like, why did I come to Penn State? I could be at home with my mom, with my dogs, with everything, but like being like just those random moments of being surrounded by people who had the same passions as me was like that reminder of like, wait, hold on. Like I'm sitting here for a reason. And like, so I'm gonna let the passion these people clearly have to help remind me of like my own passions. um and then the the biggest memory that even like today I share with people is actually from uh, the first event I did with my internship, which was so we brought bus trip, like we had bus trips for high school students to visit campus, just to like check out campus, do tours, have workshops that were hosted by students. Um, and I had helped running one of the workshops for these, like I think they were ninth to 12th graders who visited for the day. And I was going around just like asking all of them like, oh, you have any questions about Penn State? Like, I'm a student, you can let me know. And there was especially this one girl at one of the tables who like was really excited to like ask a million questions. But like the first thing I noticed from her was that like she looked like my niece. Like when I saw her, I was like, you are not in high school yet. What are you doing here? Like I really thought it was her and I was confused. But once I realized that it wasn't her, I was like, okay, well, you know what? She sounds very excited to be here. So let me go like talk to her. And she was asking me literally so many questions. Like she was in I remember she was interested in political science, interested in like getting involved and a lot of things that like reminded me of myself. And interestingly enough, like a little not related to Penn State, but when I was interviewing for NYU, the interviewer that I had was very discouraging, kind of calling me like not smart or anything like that. Like it was very discouraging things that like was like, why are you interviewing students if you're going to be talking to me like this, like telling me that I don't belong here? So it always left a very negative kind of feeling of like higher ed, and especially the people like that you could come in contact with, because it's like, do you want to just tell me I don't belong here? Like, you know, you could have just like told me that through my application. You didn't have to tell me that to my face. But then back to that moment with that student, like I was like thinking in my head, like, I'm here talking to this really eager student who sounds so much like me. And here I am representing Penn State to her. In her eyes, I'm probably like that woman that was telling me that I don't belong in my dream school. And like in that moment, like it really seeped in, like, oh my God, like I've had so many problems when it came to college and like feeling like I don't belong. And like here I can make a difference for like at least one student. And especially for her to like look like my niece. I was like, this could be my niece or my nephew or my little sister or just anyone like who like has the dream of going to college. And when she was asking her questions, like I was just responding with so much enthusiasm back to her, like, yes, of course, do this, do that, like make sure you get on top of your applications when the time comes, like, and just made sure that I gave her the exact opposite experience that I had, because that's what I deserved. So that's like a very special memory to me, because that's like why, that's part of why I tell people why I'm in higher ed now, is because I had that one bad experience that like nearly made me be like, I don't belong in college at all. But luckily, like I had the chance to turn it around for someone. And like that made me realize like I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I really don't like a lot of things about Penn State, but the realizations for like my passions was like something that Penn State like very hugely helped me with.
And would you say that you feel pride in being a Penn Stater? Why or why not?
This is always a tricky question, because unfortunately through Latino Caucus, for anyone who's ever involved in Latino Caucus knows that the things like that we push for, initiatives that we push for, like are always either very not recepted by like whoever we're trying to advocate them to, or it's very like, oh yeah, we'll do that, but it's like things that are very turned down a lot of times, take so long a lot of times, or you can even sometimes even notice like people know that you'll be advocating for something for the 4 years you're here, but then you're gone and they'll just take advantage of that. So I had a lot of experiences like that in my undergrad that made me think like, oh my God, college sucks if this is what college is supposed to be like. But I mean, I have pride in the parts of Penn State that I was able to call home. Because that is Penn State. It might not be, what is it, 60% of the Penn State population's Penn State, but it's my Penn State, and like I'm definitely prideful of like that part of Penn State because of who they connected me to and who like I was able to meet, because everyone's always so amazing, from like the multicultural community that I was able to call home, and like even the faculty and staff that I was connected to. Like I would say I need to give details about it, but the short answer is yes.
Perfect, because the follow-up question is, what do you think that Penn State could do to help Latino or Latina Latinx students? And what could it do to make Penn State and the university life better for Latino, Latina, Latinx students?
Well, there were like so many things. I
Okay, how
remember
about top
graduating.
two?
Like, oh,
Top two. Top two things that you remember, or you remember being like, oh, this needs to happen.
one of the last initiatives we were working on was trying to make it, like Penn State is known for thon and like football and all those things. And so one of the last things that we were trying to work on is trying to make it also like, well, these big things about the campus, but what about the multicultural things? Like, I feel like that's such a huge thing that Penn State can work on, is putting multicultural opportunities, whether it's clubs, programs, offices, whatever it is, more at the forefront for students when they first come here, because at least they know that it exists, because it could be the difference of like transferring or dropping out for some students. So that's a huge thing. And then a second thing, I mean, not be so expensive. Like, for real, Penn State could just like, I know that's a lot bigger thing. It has to do with state government and all that stuff, but like accessibility, especially for being like one of the top schools that even just like Pennsylvanian high school students usually go to after high school, I feel like is a huge thing that they can work on, is just the accessibility of the university as a whole, because tuition increases every other month at this point, and it really sucks because it really keeps a lot of great students out of the amazing experience that clearly like generations of families have been able to have. So those are my top two.
And then kind of a closing question to wrap this up. Is there a person that really changed the course of your life by something that he or she did? How did it happen? Do you remember someone saying something to you and it just had a big impact on your life? And who was it? I mean, that's the other question.
um hmm, that's a question. um hmm. I'm not good with keeping in touch with like one single person for a very long time. So I feel like because of that, I'm able to like take many things from like the different relationships I have with people. So it's hard to pick out one. But in my like entire life, like um hmm, I'll go the easy route and say my mom, because like even though she never understood like a single thing that like I had like so much energy for, like politics wise, or like even sharing with her like stuff that I do at Penn State, she'd be like in her head, she'd be like, I don't know what she's talking about. But like on the outside, she would always be like so supportive and being like, that is amazing. Of course, you did such amazing things, because that's just who you are as a person. And so I really appreciate that energy from her. It's not like one single thing she said, but it's like all the little things she's always told me is like, being able to get what she never was able to have, and her being so proud to see me not just like experience it, but like take it to like the highest potential that I can with like the experiences that I'm given. So she's definitely like a huge person in my life, and like I said, not like one specific thing she's ever said because I've known her my whole life, but just with everything she's ever like done to keep me pushing is like what's made her like a huge impact in my life.
Well, that was my last question for you today. So thank you for taking the time to interview with me today.
Of course. Thank you for your interest in interviewing me.